I really appreciate all of you coming here. I think you've made a good decision. So first lesson, decision making. Come to trainings on decision making. So intuitively, it will never feel correct to think a situation through, but that's when that's when we would benefit from going against our intuitions a little bit.
It's obvious that a lot of white people look at blacks and they have this bias already. How can we not think that way?
Sure. And there's really actually a quite easy strategy that's hard to apply. It's easy to describe. It's a psychological debiasing strategy. So debiasing strategies in general are a category of strategies that we can use to get away from these biases that we all have. A strategy called de-anchoring that they mentioned. So we all have to automatically give this person more positive points than we intuitively, emotionally think. So when we see a black person, we think, okay, give that person plus 10% points for whatever quality. You might have heard of it as the saber-tooth response. You know, the thing that causes us to jump out of the way of a moving car before we even know what we did. It's a good thing. We want to jump out of the way of that moving car, but it's not good for, when our boss gives us negative feedback that we really should learn from, as opposed to be like la 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 and not listening. That's a bad response. You don't want to do that saber-tooth response when your boss gives you constructive critical feedback. Process goals are often easier to accomplish and plan for because they're more under your control.
Yeah, you think what you're hearing is what is influencing you, but in fact it may be what you're seeing that may be the biggest influence?
Very much so. How various presidential candidates present themselves, what gestures they use, like the gestures I'm using right now.
All right.
Their facial gestures. Those are much more important than we intuitively think they are, and we are very strongly influenced by these things. So one of the things, one of the organizations I'm consulting with right now is a large engineering consulting firm, which has a lot of technical engineers something like 150 who work on things like welding, so hard engineers, not software engineers. And these engineers are supposed to do marketing for the firm, but they're not really good at marketing. And they don't spend time doing that. They love their techie problems. They're nerdy problems. They love working on these things. That's what they care about, problem solving. The company needs them to do marketing in order to get sales. The sales are falling. So the HR people, the managers, they thought that the engineers were, either they were inherently anti-marketing kind of because they were either lazy or maybe they were just introverted, so ascribing it to internal characteristics. Now, they brought me in and I looked at what they were doing to try to motivate engineers to do marketing. And I found that what they were doing was essentially telling engineers to get a personal brand and kind of think of themselves as a company. And that just wasn't working for the engineers. It wasn't resonating with them emotionally. They didn't care about that. So I talked to the engineers and I saw what resonated with them emotionally was getting respect from their peers in the field and being thought leaders and sharing about their favorite nerdy, techie subjects. So reframing the language of how they talked about marketing, to talk about thought leadership, to talk about getting respect among your peers, and to talk about opportunities to share more about what you really care about, the engineers, about their techie problems, was a wonderful way of motivating engineers emotionally to do marketing. This is not going to be a lecture by a long-winded professor who will just be boring you with theory. I want to give you pragmatic and practical advice. And I don't, as any scholar, I want to provide you with evidence of this. So I'll provide you with evidence from previous people from whom I gave this presentation and whom I coached and did consulting for. So this was from an unsolicited email by Teresa Trost from a presentation I did much like this one. I will never approach decision-making the same way again. You gave me some wonderful insights on cognitive biases and how they influence our decisions. I plan to use your pre-mortem process with my team and our board. So that's a speaking presentation. Now, this next one is by someone many of you know here.
See that coming.
Would you do the honor of reading it?
So I work for an engineering firm. We contacted Gleb to acquire some insights into how to motivate scientific people to sell themselves. The constant challenge of the business. Engineers don't like to sell. So Gleb used his research-based approach to behavioral psychology to engage us in a conversation that provided several very helpful insights into how we communicate with our engineers. We were using far too much business speak that was not connecting emotionally with our people. For example, we've stopped using the word brand and now use the word reputation, which resonates with scientists. So I have to say that one of the things Gleb said to me when I'm talking about, I'm not an engineer, have never been an engineer, but I work in human resources. And he started talking to me about emotion. My first response was, engineers have emotions? And he went on to teach me that, even engineers, scientists, although they like to think of themselves as rational animals, still, like the rest of us, are driven primarily by emotional thinking and emotional responses to language.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate you reading that.
There was a lot of good feedback from those who attended, and a lot of thought about what activities on our part might help us to find purpose in our lives.
We invited Gleb to do his presentation. We were very pleased with it. I'd like to point out that quite often in these presentations, we have a gap in time where people sort of do one-on-one talking or getting together in groups and then come back. This was the most lively of all the groups that we've had so far.